Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 News. The 2024 season continues to deliver probably the biggest drama that we've seen of the season so far. On-track action goes down today. Verstappen and Norris, it has been brewing over the last few rounds, and today a slow pit stop for Max gives rise to an absolute barrage of drama. Twitter is on fire today as a result of this Norris versus Verstappen beef going seemingly next level. Good friends for a very long time, not necessarily the case after today, but not just the drivers, but actually the teams. Andrea Stella and McLaren with some very interesting words said on Max's driving style. The fact that when he's under pressure again, we see this version of Max Verstappen that we saw back in 2021 or previously come out to play yet again. So much to dive into today. Very much intriguing your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new as always. We got some hints that there was a potential race in our hands today during, of course, the sprint yesterday. Didn't get a video done yesterday, but to be fair, this is basically what was going on. We had Norris and Piastri both side by side trying to take down Max, and it was Lando that had the chance. He got the move done on Max into turn 3. He then had DRS because he made a nice late lunge down the inside, so was just behind at the DRS detection point for the run down to turn 4. Gets the move done, but Max then dives down the inside and gets it back, and Max is so good around here. Usually almost always wins. Lando after the sprint race was deeply frustrated that he left the door open, and honestly, after the sprint, they then went into qualifying, and Red Bull made some setup changes. This is part of the advantage that is now gained for teams, let's say like Red Bull, but the fact that there's now two Parc Ferme, they have one practice session, then they have to set up the car for sprint qualifying and the sprint. But after the sprint, they are now allowed to change the setup settings on the car. That's what they did. Red Bull generated a massive performance delta, it felt like. I mean, Max was on pole for the main thing by 0.4 of a second, which is insanely big around a circuit like Austria. And the race pace advantage early on also looked pretty good. But as the race went on, as the different tyre compounds came through, it became clear that the Red Bull isn't back to being an indomitable car in the hands of Max, let's say like it was back in China, even though Red Bull say, yeah, after the sprint, which Max won, but arguably he might not have done, had Lando actually completed that move properly down into turn 4 that he was frustrated about, obviously, and is probably more frustrated on the results of today. Then Red Bull and Helmut Marko are saying, hey, 0.4 on this track around Spa, that's like a second, maybe even more. And then he says, we focused on race pace. So there is, an understanding maybe that Red Bull have found something, but, and again, they would have won the race comfortably today, if not for some rare errors from their pit stop crew and, well, leaving Verstappen in a battle. And when Verstappen is in a real battle for the race win, we know what can sometimes happen, as it has done in the past. We haven't seen it for the last few years. Today we saw it, and as a result, there is lots of discussion about it. This was the grid going into the Grand Prix. Norris was P2. Piastri could have been P3, but his lap time was deleted at turn 6 track limit. Now, there was some drama about this. McLaren actually tried to get his lap time reinstated because at turn 9, turn 10, if you go outside of track limits, you're on the gravel and therefore you're losing time. The same is true at turn 6, but so Piastri absolutely lost time going outside of the white line at turn 6 onto the gravel. So the argument was made, let's be real here. He might have gone outside of track limits, but he lost time doing so because the gravel is there. And there is an argument to say, if you're going to have the gravel, if you go outside of track limits, you're guaranteed to be on the gravel. Do you really need to enforce the white line in the same way? Maybe not. But the rule is the white line, so Piastri didn't get his lap time back. Perez was like a second off Max. Today he was so slow. There's a lot to talk about. But Russell, going into the Grand Prix, said this. Those two were pretty dicey in the sprint race yesterday, so I think I'll just sit back, watch them do their thing, and hopefully just sneak through. So George, it seems it's in the future on this one. The race starts. Max again gets a good start into turn 1. Bit of drama. Well, you can actually see it unfolding here. We've got Piastri, Leclerc. Perez gets a good start, and Leclerc just gets massively squeezed between those two cars. There was also Sainz versus Hamilton. So Sainz is on the inside. Hamilton gets a nice run around the outside, but just doesn't have enough track to stay on. There's an argument that Sainz pushed in wide, whatever. It's a first corner thing. Hamilton eventually gets the move done into turn 3, but then was forced to give the place back, and then obviously cooked his tyres a bit trying to get Sainz back over the coming laps. But Leclerc got big damage, and I don't know if Charles sold his soul or something to win that Grand Prix in Monaco, but wow, his luck since then has been absolutely tragic, and it doesn't seem like it's going to turn around. I will say on Ferrari, they're just kind of slow now compared to where they were before. There was lots of talk actually after yesterday about the fact that Ferrari simply don't understand exactly what's going on with their upgrades, why they aren't really delivering the performance they want to. Ferrari publicly will, do the classic, our faults of Ferrari, like, we're still the best team in the world, all this type of stuff. But clearly behind the scenes, there are some questions on exactly why their upgrades haven't delivered the results they wanted. But anyway, Leclerc gets damaged, and it wasn't far after this that he had to pit that Verstappen was like basically lapping him, and yeah, it wasn't pretty for Ferrari. But even then, like, Leclerc had some other damage, just didn't have much pace, nearly got a point at the end of the day based on all the drama. But the race at this point looked very dull. I mean, Verstappen was in the lead, he was building a comfortable advantage, seemed to have way more pace than anybody else. Norris was clearly the second fastest car, then it was Russell, Sainz, Hamilton, bit of battling there, but nothing really happened. The Haas are in quite a promising position. Perez and Piastri had a nice little battle in the middle of the race, but basically nothing was happening. I know there was some drama with like the Williams cars, and I think Alonso took out like Zhou at some point, and there were some things happening, but realistically there was no battle for the win, and Leclerc was obviously at the back of the field behind Max Verstappen by a rather long way. So Ferrari, I'm sure that'll be a topic for another day. Then Lewis Hamilton comes into the box, and coming into the pits just about goes over the white line entry. There was some talk about this because there have been occasions over the last couple of seasons where somebody's gone outside of the white line and they've kind of got away with it, or the argument's been made that, well, the tyre, maybe all of it wasn't over, so it's fine. But in this case, Piastri reported it and said, hey, Lewis just went over the white line, and he got a 5-second penalty as a result. Toto was on the radio being like, look, Lewis, let's keep focused. The potential is still there to get a good result today. And it certainly was, as absolutely George Russell showed. Just quickly on Perez, right? Because we're going to discuss the Verstappen drama in a second. But let's be real today. Verstappen had a crash with Norris, had an extra pit stop as a result, had a 10-second penalty, did basically an entire lap on 3 tyres, and still finished ahead of Sergio Perez today. And, well, look, he had some damage here, Perez. You can actually see it on the pit stop, so just did want to mention it. There was some side pod damage, and probably with contact, I think, with Piastri, maybe it was at turn 4, turn 5, the exit there, they had a bit of a collision, so I think that might have been what this was from. But still, Perez had no pace. He was on the radio saying the car's so slow, I don't really know why. And it would have been really nice for Max Verstappen today to have a teammate to help him defend. But yeah, that is not how things are currently working. These, by the way, were the 2 Alpines, again going at it. You simply can't stop it, can you? Like, these 2 guys are like, Prost and Senna. They're doing battle. There's so much drama on track between the 2 of them. But yet they're in a terrible car that's fighting on the borderline of points. But this is what was going on. So Hamilton gets, the penalty. Piastri eventually gets past him regardless, and it looked like, okay, Oscar's in position to do pretty well. And to be fair to Piastri, starting P7 to end up where he did today was very commendable. But obviously it could have been one better had this situation gone differently. So Max comes into the pit. Checo also had a bad stop as well. So uncharacteristic errors, I would say, from Red Bull, because it looked like Max was going to win this race just so easily. There wasn't really going to be a challenge. He led from pole, he led basically all the laps. However, Norris, after the pit stop phase, actually comes out in a position to potentially challenge, and all of a sudden on those new tyres, Norris was putting the pressure on, was in the DRS zone, and there was a few moments where they came to blows, where effectively, Verstappen would defend very aggressively, as he does. Norris would have to take avoiding action, even as Norris says, after one of their first little, on-track squabbles, yeah, he reacted to my move, you're not allowed to do that. And as we can see, Norris is putting the pressure on. Max is feeling the pressure to get the race victory given the circumstances. Again, we see a moment where Max forces Norris wide. Norris tries to make the move, but he runs out of road, has to go off the track. And this is the way that Max has driven. When he's in title battles, as he was in 2021, and when he's in battles for the race victory, he will be absolutely on the border of whatever the rule says. And there's been many rules over the last few years that have been changed solely due to Max Verstappen, as it was the case, let's say, in the whole safety car thing, when he would be right on, let's say, Hamilton's nose, and then they say, no, Max, you can't come alongside after the safety car. So many rules Max has got changed over the last few years. And I think it's moments like this that show why there's frustration from teams and drivers and even fans, obviously, on the way Max drives. Because he did this for years, right? Especially in the 2021 days. The decision for Max often was, okay, I'm going to put my car here, I'm going to do this, and if you want to avoid the contact, you will have to go off the track and take avoiding action. It's basically, you move or we're going to crash. And we saw that plenty of times during 2021, and often Lewis would be like, okay, I'm going to take avoiding action, like in Spain. I mean, I don't have to go through all the races that occurred during the 2021 season. Of course, Brazil was absolutely an example when Hamilton, turn 4 Brazil, had to choose. Was he going to to crash or was he going to go to the runoff area? And this is what Norris had to decide in this moment. He was like, well, okay, do I take avoiding action or do I basically just crash because Max is going to crash otherwise? And the same thing happened, let's say, Brazil 2022, another race that George Russell won where Hamilton and Verstappen crashed, and Verstappen said after the race that, well, yeah, I was going to put my car there and he knows that I'm going to put my car there, so if he wants to turn in and take a corner which is his, then we're going to collide, which is what happened in that race, and George Russell went on to win. But at some point, you know, you've got to make a move, right? Like, Norris knew that he couldn't keep dealing with this, and also because Verstappen was the one making the questionable defensive moves, as we will analyse right about here, but Norris was the one that was kind of forced to take off the track, and therefore he was getting a 5-second penalty for exceeding track limits 4 times. So there was a 5-second penalty on the way for Norris. Now, had they dished out that penalty earlier, things may have been somewhat different, but obviously didn't happen. The stewards were sitting back, eating their popcorn and enjoying the show. So this was the actual incident itself. So here's the corner. Max defends the inside line, Norris to the outside, and just look exactly where Max is on the track. So you see there's probably a couple of car widths here between Max. At this point, they're braking 100-meter board. They're braking for the corner. This is at the 50-meter board when Max is now under braking, moving to the left. Now this, you know, by the rules, and this is why they penalise him, it's not allowed, right? Like, you've got to choose your line when you go into braking, and if you, while braking, react to a move of an, you know, counterpart, this is what's gonna, you know, you're gonna get penalised. Norris is on the outside. You can now see that the gap between Verstappen and the, you know, the curb is basically a car's width, and at this point, it is less than a car's width as they collide. So this was the moment for the first time this season, and it wasn't long ago that we were during the Miami Grand Prix weekends, and we had quotes like this, when Miami obviously was won by Lando, and Max said, Lando winning was the most beautiful part of the race. If someone has to beat me, I want it to be Lando. I wonder if he will be saying the same thing this evening. Of course, Lando didn't win, but at this moment they collide. Max moves under braking, Lando collides with him, they both get punctures, and Max has to crawl back to the pits, as does Lando. But for Lando, the race was over, right? They're both crawling back to the pits, and, you know, just incredible. I mean, this is another moment as well from earlier on. Absolute fireworks. And this is George Russell, who was several seconds behind the action and gets to come through here at the end of Sector 2 and just drive clean past both Lando and Max into a race-winning position. So he bode his time. He knew what the opportunity was up ahead. And I feel like it's been a long time coming, right? We've seen these Lando versus Max battles over the last few rounds. None of it's really come to a head quite like it did today. And in some ways it was inevitable. I think Sainz even mentions this was going to happen at some point. But Lando, you know, absolutely fuming about this, and for good reason. This was a race win on the cards for championship standings, not just for drivers, but also for constructors, and of course with a race victory on the line. This is a massive deal, and the fact that Lando was out, Max then comes back into the pits, gets a 10-second penalty for causing the collision, which arguably, given, you know, look, that is probably what the stewards will decide given the circumstances, and it shouldn't really be, I don't think, about the result. It should be about the intention and the action itself. But still, it does feel a bit bad that Lando got 0 points as a result of this, whereas Max got a 10-second penalty and still picked up a fair few points on the day. And actually, the gap between Lando and Max in the championship has now increased, I think, even more than it would have done had Lando won in a 1-2. So, you know, Lando probably would have gone on to win the Grand Prix had he got that move done, but no, of course the collision comes through, but it's George Russell who was in position to capitalise. Hamilton will be deeply frustrated as well, because his pace wasn't really so much there today. Sure, different strategy, went longer on stints, these some of other things happened, but again, if Hamilton just qualifies a bit better, then this could have been his race victory today. And again, Russell just capitalising on opportunities presented, and what a timeline in Formula 1. Like, over the last few rounds, we have had Ferraris win Grand Prix, we've had Red Bulls win Grand Prix, we have had, you know, McLarens win Grand Prix in Miami, and now we have a Mercedes winning a Grand Prix. Now, like, in terms of the championship, it's still going to be Max is going to win. And maybe Red Bull are now in a nice position after today, given the fact that Lando did not score any points. These are the final results. Russell wins the Grand Prix. Yes, you heard it correctly. Piastri P2, Sainz P3, Hamilton just off the podium. Verstappen then comes 5th in the end. So, I mean, what is that? 25, 18, 15, 12, 10 points. Max got 10 points today. Norris got 0, and that increases the gap more than would have been the case had Max even got a 1-2 with Norris, which is it worked out for Max. Obviously, it worked out for Max. And there's question just to whether it should have done. Perez had no pace. What a day for the Hasses as well. They're always good around here. For some reason, the way they design their car, they're always good here. They sandwiched Perez, Ricciardo, P9 in the RB. Good result for him getting a couple of points. Gasly was P10 after the drama with Ocon. Leclerc fights back to P11 in the end, but no points scored for that. And yeah, this was the discussion of the fact that his championship lead is now more than it would have been if it was at 1-2. And this is why, there's some frustration, loads of discussion around this driving style. Obviously, some comments here on Perez and his pretty torrid day. But let's look at Lando's response, right? Because he was obviously frustrated, and I wonder how the relationship of these two will go going forward. We know this is how it goes. When you've got two guys that might be good friends, let's say Lewis and Nico, Hamilton and Rosberg, as it was in the Mercedes days, boys for several years. As soon as the on-track stuff starts to come to a head, we see those personal relationships are not the same as they once were. They may mend at some point in the future, but I think there was no doubt in my mind that if this Norris-Verstappen rivalry continues, as it looked like it was going to, and it certainly did today, their personal relationship will begin to be strained. And Lando was very clear after the race here that he felt like Max was way over the line. There are rules in terms of braking and moving under braking that are meant to be followed. Nothing I can do about it. If Max says that he had done nothing wrong, I will lose a lot of respect for him. He actually went even one further, I think, Lando, when he was talking to Sky Sports Italy and said, if he claims to be in the right with the way that he defended, our friendship will be over. If he admits that he did something stupid, then I will understand. And Max, could have responded more emphatically on this. The other point that I wanted to mention, though, is it's not just Lando versus Max today. It's actually Andrea Stella and McLaren versus Verstappen's driving style in these instances. Because, we saw this in 2021. I mean, this, of course, is Monza, which was one of the more spectacular crashes, of course, of the year. But it was absolutely for Max a, do or die moment the entire year. That's the way that he drove. And that's the way that, inarguably, you could say, the stewards let him get away with. Like, there were plenty of moments during 2021 that were potentially over the line, and people said that they maybe were. But the stewards wouldn't punish Max, and therefore Max was like, well, and even other drivers were like, well, why am I going to drive in a way if it's not going to get punished? If this is going to win me a race and the stewards aren't going to say anything about it, why would I not do that? You're incentivizing that kind of driving. And Andrea Stella's point is that when they were fighting, Lewis and Max, back in 2021, there were plenty of fights back then that, as he says, needed to have been punished in a harsher way. The problem is that if you don't address these things honestly, they will come back. The argument effectively being, Max has got away with this stuff for years. Now we've got to do something about it in terms of the rulings around this, because Max gets away with it again today, really. Sure, he doesn't win the race, but his lead in the championship goes up as a result of today. And there are serious questions as to whether that should be the case or not. There was interesting discussion from Julian Palmer that effectively Lando is showing Max too much respect in the same way that Lewis obviously showed respect to Max in terms of the on-track driving in 2021 that Max did not necessarily show the other way. I mean, just an example came to mind, Saudi Arabia 2021, was an absolute disaster class of a race, but the amount of times into turn one that those incidents occurred, even in the final corner, all this stuff that happened during that Grand Prix, similar thing, right? And it was Max driving in a certain way and not being penalised for it. And therefore, why would he not do the same thing today when Lando Norris is alongside him and there's another battle for the race victory? And, as Julian Palmer says, it's these grey areas that Max operates in when it comes down to these rules, and that's why there is frustration about it. So, of course, Red Bull were going to respond to this, right? Christian Horner said that it felt like Norris was trying to cause some drama at turn 3. So, look, Horner's not going to admit that Max was in the wrong. Look, I think Max's move under braking was against the rules. Norris feels the same way. The stewards feel the same way. I feel like most people who watched it feel the same way. But, Horner seemingly doesn't feel the same way, right? He's like, no, it was Norris who was at fault somehow after knowing that he would get a track limits penalty. I don't know. Maybe there's something to be said on that. Max, look, he didn't make it clear in terms of, I wasn't at fault, it was Lando's fault or whatever. But what he said was certainly not an apology, right? And Lando seems to have said, look, apologise to me for what you did or we're no longer friends. And Max is basically saying, I'm going to apologise. Like, this is what he said during the Grand Prix when they were, given a 10-second penalty, and Max is like, look, it's ridiculous. That sometimes happens in the car. But after the race, he was asked, like, you could have let him by, you're leading the championship, and Max says, I could also just stay home. I'm here to win, not to finish second. When you're fighting for the win, why can't you fight in a hard way? It's not how people should operate, or it's not how people operate or should operate, he says. And look at his face. Like, this is, the Max, you can clearly see there's some frustration, anger on his face as well about the whole situation. And obviously there was discussion from the journalist to Max saying, hey, he said that he'll lose respect for you. And maybe Max doesn't care. Like, Max knows how it is. Like, he knows the way that he's driving, and he knows that he's obviously an incredible driver, right? But Max also knows that driving in that way, in those moments, gets success more often than it doesn't, based on the way that those situations have been treated. Like, I don't necessarily even blame Max for the way that he drives in these instances, just because the stewards have allowed it based on what they did back in 21 and even previously at times. So why would Max not drive in that way? And, Max is just going to use every potential avenue to gain the most success possible. And again, it's worked for him today in many ways. And, I'm not sure Max is particularly going to be frustrated the fact that Norris maybe loses respect for him or whatever. So, yeah, as Max says, I need to look back at why or how we touch. Of course, we'll talk about it. Unfortunate that it happened because it, of course, cost Max the victory. But as it did to Lando Norris, there's so much drama. I'm sure that ain't going to go away. Russell takes the race victory. Just to quickly mention, Lando's 5-second pen was actually added to his race time because he was a classified finisher, and therefore it won't be carried over to the British Grand Prix, because I know there was some concern about that. But wow, what a day. Just a further quick quote here from Norris, because I just refreshed. He calls the crash reckless from Max. He says it was desperate from his side, didn't need to be. Norris then continues, it was a bit desperate to do what he could to not let be passed, basically. I know he's going to be aggressive, so in a way I'm not surprised. I expected tough, fair, on the edge racing. I don't feel like that's what I got. So wow, intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. As always, here's George Russell with the trophy for the Grand Prix. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.